Everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going to be talking about antimicrobial resistance and focusing on the One Health pillar of environment and looking at manufacturing emissions. My name is Courtney Soulsby. I'm the Global Director for our Healthcare Sector team at BSI, British Standards Institution, and I'm joined here today by Steve Brooks, the Manufacturing Secretariat for the AMR Industry Alliance, and we're here to tell you a little bit about the progress and action-oriented progress that we have made when looking at governing manufacturing emissions and countering and mitigating the AMR threat. Steve, would you mind by starting us off by telling us a little bit more about the Manufacturing Working Group and the AMR Industry Alliance?
Sure. Thanks, Courtney. It's a pleasure to be here today. Well, first of all, the Alliance is a life science initiative covering the generic pharmaceutical industry, the innovative pharmaceutical industry, biotechs, and diagnostics. And we're joined together in the fight against AMR. So we comprise approximately 100 companies and associations, industry associations, and we tackle AMR on 4 fronts where we believe the industry has a key role to play. I do want to stress that we don't do all this work on our own. We work with lots of other stakeholders in the space, but the 4 areas we're focused on are access to antibiotics, appropriate use of antibiotics, the research and science that underpins the discovery and development of new antibiotics and technologies to identify infectious diseases. And finally, and the area that I'm involved in, and we're going to talk more about, manufacturing and the emissions of antibiotic from manufacturing of these life-saving critical medicines, in fact, and the concern that if that's not properly controlled, those emissions could, in fact, contribute to the development of antimicrobial resistance in the environment.
That's great, Stephen, and a wonderful collection of expertise coming together to really be focusing on the manufacturing and the environment concept. Real quick, a note on BSI, British Standards Institution, and then we'll talk a little bit about the journey that the AMR Industry Alliance and BSI have gone on over the last 3+ years. So BSI is an independent not-for-profit distribution organization where we have 4 main business units. We are a national standards body and founding member of ISO, International Standards Organization. We're also an independent third-party assurance provider, so providing independent assessment and certification to standards. And finally, we also are a notified body acting on behalf of the regulator in the healthcare space to approve devices going into new markets, and then finally have a deep subject matter knowledge through our consulting arm. So BSI is, through those unique statuses, well positioned to be a neutral arbitrator to instill trust and also drive progress in the area of antimicrobial resistance, looking at the manufacturing space specifically. So Steve, shall we tell us a little bit about the journey we've gone on over the last few years?
Well, I'm actually going to take us back a bit further than that, because we've been working on this probably for seven years as an alliance, and for the last kind of half of that time, we've been working very closely with BSI for really all of the reasons you've just outlined, all of the expertise that you bring, that we value so much. So let me just very quickly take you back. Back in 2017, there were no regulations controlling the emissions of antibiotics into the environment anywhere in the world. And in fact, today there are still no regulatory controls. But there were concerns that antibiotics were being found in the environment, and there were also some concerns that there were significant concentrations in certain locations, and really the industry was put on notice that we needed to do a better job of understanding the risk and controlling the risk. I'm pleased to say that we stepped up to the plate as the Alliance, and over time we developed 2 work products which we subsequently I'll use the word converted. Courtney might have a better word for this, but we converted into a standard. But we developed a management system known as a framework at the time, and we developed an approach to establishing predicted no-effect concentrations of antibiotics in the environment. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but in everyday language, these are levels of antibiotics that we believe are unlikely to increase the risk of resistance developing in bacteria in the environment, and that's really the key for us here. So with a framework and the PNEX, we then asked our member companies to commit to implement these approaches across their supply chain, so their own manufacturing sites and, importantly, their supplier sites. And I'm pleased to say that we've made good progress over time, and we do every couple of years we report our progress of our members. But we recognised that the global antibiotic supply chain is very large, and whilst our members represent a significant proportion of that supply chain for human health antibiotics, we by no means represent the entire antibiotic supply chain, and we wanted to bring a solution that others could use as well. So this is why we reached out to BSI, because we felt we could develop a standard, an industry standard, which any antibiotic manufacturer could use. And most importantly, through BSI, develop an independent certification program, so that stakeholders could be confident that if a company had certification, that in fact had been independently verified. It wasn't just the company saying, "Oh yes, we meet the standard." It's we meet the standard, and here's the proof that this has been examined independently by relevant experts. So the 3.5 years that Courtney referred to has really been working on developing the industry standard in the first place, which we published in June of 2022, and then the certification program, which BSI launched in June of 2023. So we're really delighted to be at this point now where we have really tangible tools in our hands that we as an alliance and our members can use, but most importantly, others can use.
I think that's a really good key point, Steve. And I think the transition from having, a self-declaration informal framework to a formal industry standard developed with an independent body, and then also an independent assessment mechanism created by us with technical input by a number of stakeholders, including the Alliance, NGOs, regulators, government policymakers, and health systems, all inputting into, well, what would an independent assessment need to entail, and how ultimately would the deliverable, a certificate showcasing that an antibiotic indeed is produced responsibly with the right environmental and waste controls in place? So, that was not a short-term process, was it? I mean, just developing the assessment protocols, the actual requirements that we're going to look at in addition to the standard, but how you assess that is not an overnight task.
No, exactly, and it's really important to us, by the way, that the process is robust, because a company is going to be placing its trust in BSI. In fact, that, for example, a supplier is meeting the necessary requirements, and so we, the industry, as well as other stakeholders, wish to be assured that the process is robust, and that we can be confident in the outcomes of the process. So yes, it wasn't an overnight thing. It took quite some time, a number of pilot
even pilots, right? I mean, we went through 8 different pilots with generics, with CMOs, with innovative pharmas in India and Europe, lots of different geographies, different wastewater treatment mechanisms, offsite, onsite. We also made sure that we had different mechanisms to arrive at the PNEC as well, whether it was mass balance and sampling and analysis. We went through, the ZLD, zero liquid discharge model, that is often used in an Indian context. This pilot, fed a lot of learnings, I would say, because whilst individual members were absolutely doing their individual industry stakeholders were also embedding this in their manufacturing process. One of the things we learned is we had to bring all of that knowledge into how do we do it consistently and in a standardized way, so that when we're rolling the certification out globally, our assessors are following the same rules, if you will, to actually deliver the certification. And then the other thing is the auditor qualifications, right? One of the things I think that's out in the debate right now is, can we have quality people do this type of assessment, and do we need industry knowledge and environmental knowledge? And so all of those things were thrown into the debate related to how we would really systematically assess that. And I think we got there, is the positive thing. And as you said, launched in June of this 2023. And now we have officially issued our first certificates, and
which is great. So I mean, we're thrilled that we're at this point. Several of the companies that participate in the pilot now have certificates for one or more of their products, which is great. It obviously it's a milestone that we should celebrate. It's also the beginning, really, of the real journey now, which is to embed certification as, if you like, the normal way forward. That's what we'd really like to see. We believe the approach is pragmatic. We believe it is proportionate to the risk. And we know through our experience working in this space, as I say, for 7 years, we know that this can be done. We know industry can step up and do this. We have the technical knowledge and practical wherewithal to do this. So yeah, we're at a very exciting point now. And in fact, maybe Courtney, you could tell us a little bit more about what BSI are doing to further engage stakeholders who we know have definitely got a strong interest in this work.
Yeah, I think that's the important part, is once the certificate's issued and we reach scale with this, there's the ability to actually benchmark and incentivize additional either novel antibiotic research and development, whilst also making sure we get environment considered into that novel R&D development, but also legacy medicines and antibiotics, that indeed there's environmental considerations when taking into account manufacturing of existing legacy antibiotics. And with that, guys, there are a number of different procurement levers and government incentive programs in place that are looking at this challenge of how do we make sure we're keeping up with the resistance and developing new, but also mitigating the existing threat with the antibiotic portfolio out in the marketplace. So we've been working with health system procurers, and the first guys, I would say, who have that commercial lever to incentivize. I want to give major kudos to the Nordics, 5 countries who have come together to set an antibiotic tender requirements, really focusing in on the environment, not just with the finished drug product, but also transparency through the supply chain with APIs, and really weighting it, incentivizing it, 30% potentially of weighting coming from their overall tender award criteria. And they've actually acknowledged that the BSI certification is the highest score in that award criteria, and one that hopefully will lead to market drivers and shifts of wider adoption into this. There's also the NHS subscription model for novel antibiotics, with which they are asking, and their performance contractual criteria in the latest consultation, where they're incentivizing the environment and independent assessment, which the certification can also satisfy as well. So there's this health system procurement lens to it, but also, in the absence of regulation, the ability to learn from this assessment model and trust it as a mechanism for self-regulation. Or if there is indeed guidances being produced from supranational organizations like WHO or other regulators, that they're not trying to reinvent the wheel about the assessment approach that, we've gone through this really arduous process to figure out how you assess this, and let's replicate that assessment model, I think, and rather than trying to, again, reinvent the wheel or trust that indeed this assessment model is robust enough, we're in touch with a number of regulators and say, we're happy to lift up the bonnet or the hood to say, look underneath and find out what we're looking at, so that the rigor and the robustness is trusted. So I think there's a regulatory angle there as well that ultimately can be achieved through the certification. And then finally, I think there's a lot of external groups that are forming, like the Global Leaders Group, who, Dam Sally Davies and all the great work she's been doing on AMR policy advancement with the global, different countries across the globe, taking the UK AMR policy and objectives to a global stage. And she's actually said, let's not let perfect get in the way of good and great, and actually has acknowledged that this effort around the industry standard and the certification should be what the industry globally, as well as government and regulators, get behind over the next 3 to 5 years, and intends to continue that message in a lot of her efforts going through the next years leading up to the UN General Assembly next year on AMR as well. And then the final area where I think it's really important too, because we're talking about waste and we're talking about wastewater and emissions from manufacturing, is the supply chain. We all acknowledge one of the biggest risk exposures in active pharmaceutical ingredients, right, Steve? That's where the biggest risk of waste emissions happens. So, if you would talk a little bit about that exposure, I can also talk about where we're engaged with some of the supply chain functions there.
Yeah. So, right from the beginning, we've been clear that our expectation, has been that we would assess risk and address risk across the antibiotic supply chain, wherever there's the active moiety. So, from the formation of the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, through to the formulation of the drug product, the medicine that a patient takes, a tablet or capsule or injectable. So the standard and certification applies across that spectrum. Those products may be made in-house, a company's own facilities. They may be made by a supplier, or it may be a mixture of both. But the approach that we've taken across our membership has been that we expect our members to meet the standard at their own sites and at their supplier sites, so that that they influence their suppliers. And we certainly expect the same with certification as well. So yeah, I think this approach covers the supply chain, and addresses a number of concerns that stakeholders have raised. So, for example, I can mention transparency. So the certificate will be very clear which antibiotic it covers and where it's made. I know this has been a concern about transparency in the supply chain. So hopefully as we build a database of certified products, we'll be better able to address those concerns. And I think net this is going to be really beneficial. I do just want to come back, Courtney, to the UN General Assembly in 2024 and the high level meeting. Obviously, there's going to be a lot going on leading up to that, and hopefully some really good direction coming out from the meeting. And we very much hope that the approach that we've taken here can be built into the preparatory work for the high level meeting. And obviously, our strongest desire would be to see it included in the outcome of the meeting. So we need to continue to engage our partners and stakeholders as we go through this process.
And I think that's the key thing. Since the last one in 2016 to where next year's high level meeting is, the amount of action and progress that's been taken in this space is significant, and really addresses one of the key source challenges of where potentially resistance could be occurring. So I think that's one of the key parts of why we're pushing this through, as you said, the supply chain, through organizations like PSCI, Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, and also embedding that into how they're engaging with pharmaceutical suppliers as well. So another key point where you can see on the certificate finished drug product at site A is certified, and here's the finished, API at site B, and linking those certificates so that indeed you can have that transparency, which is really critical, like we talked about. So I just want to conclude us, Steve, by saying thank you for the great efforts from the Alliance and the support, but also really want to encourage all stakeholders to ask questions of BSI and understand the assessment process and the certification and the value it could potentially have with your specific lens. You can do that by clicking on the link that we've included here with this video that gives access to more information about that, as well as guidance to how you would actually embed the assessment process and conform to the industry standard. And again, we look forward to everyone's support to really driving progress in relation to manufacturing emissions into the environment through adoption of the standard and certification. Thanks everyone for your time, and wish you luck.